It's a rhetoric question. I don't expect you to answer it, but it is one which does bother me. And we've had some wonderful presentations over the past 2 days talking about these exact concepts. In a presentation yesterday, which highlighted a group of students aged between 8 and 11 who were performing at the 50th percentile. And in a controlled study, I'm not familiar with the study, I'm reporting what was shown yesterday, but in a controlled study where one group of students was given a high-performing teacher and where one group of students was given a low-performing teacher. And we were shown on the slide clear evidence of the difference in impact that those students had after a period of engagement with a high-performing teacher compared to a low-performing teacher. And so I struggle to understand how, at least in my system, we don't evaluate the performance of teachers. We don't expect them to do professional qualifications. We don't ask them to update their professional knowledge on an annual basis. And it is therefore likely that we have some teachers in universities who don't encourage lifelong learning. Many of us will recall people who have been part of our educational experiences who changed our lives, who made us or created in us a passion for a subject area or a passion in something which we have pursued throughout our lives. And really, and surely, every young person, in fact every old person, who is engaging in lifelong learning has a right to have access to people who are inspiring, who are capable, who are competent, and who are familiar with the most recent techniques. Higher education in the UK is changing quite significantly, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. In the Higher Education Academy, we've chosen to focus on 7 broad areas which, in my higher education system, are increasingly relevant. They're listed here: internationalisation, the assessment of student work and the timely nature of that feedback, the employability of students beyond their qualification, the use of flexible learning, back to my example before of your mobile phone, the retention and success of students in the system, the reward and recognition of outstanding teachers in universities, and now with a new green agenda, education for sustainable development. These are perhaps the most highly relevant areas of concern within higher education in the UK. But we sit within a changing environment. And for me in the UK, that changing environment is the introduction of an extremely rigid and very different fee regime. And if you've been following the developments in UK higher education, you will have seen that in England, and remember the UK is comprised of 4 separate nations and they all have different fee structures. But in England from September 2012, most students entering higher education will be establishing a debt of £9,000 per year. I guess that's around 12,000 euros. So over a 3-year degree period, students will have a teaching debt of £27,000. That's a huge number. It's a worrying concern because people who have an aversion to debt, those who come from poor backgrounds, those with limited or little experience of education beyond secondary school, are unlikely to see the options of gaining higher level skills and all that that brings with it as a realistic option for them. I mentioned learning technologies. I visited a local university here yesterday and was delighted to see many, many modern technologies being used in that institution: interactive whiteboards, mobile technology. I was also very pleased to see a blackboard, because a blackboard is modern technology for some subject areas, and I've no problem with its use. Technology is whatever is relevant for the group that you're working with. In the UK, we're seeing increased competition in universities. The government has opened up the opportunity for anybody, once licensed, to deliver higher education in the UK. And so we're seeing many private providers, many international universities, seeing the UK as a possibility for the development of their higher education landscape. But one of the threats for international competition, which is very seldom talked about in the UK, is that of continental Europe. And while I am unfamiliar with the range of programs that may be being taught in Spain in English, I am very familiar that across continental Europe there are huge numbers of university programs now being delivered entirely in English at fees which are much cheaper than in the UK, with staff-student ratios that are far more productive for learning than in the UK, with multicultural experiences which are not always apparent in the UK, and with huge employment opportunities beyond the degree. I then mention employers and employability. At the moment, there are over 2 million people unemployed in the UK. It's the highest number for more than 20 years. Almost 1 million of those unemployed people are aged between 16 and 24. Many of them have degrees and yet do not have employment. So questions are being asked now. Are we providing people with a realistic opportunity to gain employment if that was their purpose and their reason for getting a degree? We have reduced teaching budgets, and we have growing student numbers in the UK. 43% of those people under 30 attend university in the UK. The previous government's aspiration was 50%, which is not an unreasonable target, but it's perhaps now a target that may not be achieved given the unemployment rates we have. So, what am I trying to do? Again, back to my organisation, the HEA, the Higher Education Academy. We see it as incumbent upon us to ensure that the best teachers are working in higher education. People who can unlock the potential that we heard Jack Delors talk about today, yesterday, and in his publication 15 years ago. Undoubtedly, people, regardless of age, have great potential to learn new skills, to learn new knowledge for their own purposes. And I'm not professing their own purposes should be for employment. But when governments invest in education, they are doing so for a range of reasons, and some of those will be to gain the economic benefit of the fruits of education. So increasingly in the UK, vocational education becomes important. Universities have taken a mixed response to this. Some universities are working very closely with employers, with graduate programs to enable young people, regardless of age, to do degree programs and then be employed beyond their completion. And so this tripartite relationship between governments, between businesses, and between higher education establishments becomes an even more impressive and important role and goal for us to ensure that lifelong learning process is undertaken seriously by universities. Last year, my organisation published a quite famous researcher in the UK called Graham Gibbs to look at some of the aspects of teaching quality in higher education. You heard me refer a moment ago to the study we saw evidence of yesterday, which was with primary school children. There is limited evidence anywhere in the world which looks at the quality of teaching in universities and the impact it has on learning. However, this work, and this piece of work is freely available from our website, demonstrates that, according to the research findings of Graham, university staff who are qualified to teach do in fact provide a more positive learning experience for the students they come into contact with, and that in itself increases their chance of success, the love of their subject area, and the likelihood of them becoming return users, lifelong users of educational experiences in universities. You see, for me, every student matters. And that's been a manifesto delivered by the British government over a number of years, where regardless of the age, wherever the educational experience may take place, the student matters. I've been outspoken for a long time about the professionalisation of teaching, and by that I mean, as I referred to earlier, that people should be qualified to do the job they do. In a survey published in 2011 this year, done by an organisation called YouGov, and this was after the publication of the fee level of £9,000 that students would now be paying to go to university. In a sample of 2,047 people aged 18 plus, the survey resoundingly showed that the most important aspect of that experience that students would value would be the quality of teaching. In other words, students will begin to make choices for universities in the UK based on what they know of the quality of teaching they'll experience. Because very few people will want to invest a huge amount of money if they fear that the possibility of success, the likelihood of their aspired aspirations, which may be employment, being achieved, are going to be adversely affected by poor quality teaching. Interestingly, as you see on this slide here, the second most prolific attribute was graduate employment. So they were more concerned about the quality of teaching than they were about the likelihood of getting a job at the end of their degree. Now I want to briefly talk about transnational education, education taught outside the borders of any particular country, and back to the UK's aspiration to be a global provider of higher education, and my own personal philosophy of education, which is very much about educating the world. Transnational education becomes increasingly important. With over 400,000 students taught on programs outside of the UK, there's a huge responsibility to ensure the quality of their experience, the opportunity for them to engage in learning which becomes lifelong, and for them to be able to create the skills, knowledge, abilities, and opportunities for themselves that they sought is clearly very important. With increasing fees inside the UK, with increasing costs for most countries, and certainly the European Union more generally, it is likely that transnational education, which can be delivered much more cheaply, will be a feature of most higher education landscapes across the developed world. And I've chosen here to quote from Albert Einstein, but perhaps it's equally relevant for me to quote from others as well. El-Hajj, Malik El-Shabazz, Nelson Mandela, Tony Blair, Jacques Delors, and Einstein, as listed here, are all outstanding ambassadors in one field or another who have extolled the virtues of education at some stage during their life. So my point to you, and of course you are the